25 minutes of essentially my lips moving. So hopefully this one will be better. And I wanted to pick up where I left off yesterday. I had begun to review the applications in cosmology of light, and this is a 4 book series that was on the tail end of a 6 book series that basically looked at a framework for cosmology of light. And yesterday in the live stream, I went over the Emperor's quantum computer and basically explained my rationale for writing that book and how it relates to the cosmology of light and why it's different from the existing thinking on quantum computing. Now, today, what I'd like to do is focus on the 2nd book in the series, which is The Origins and Possibilities of Genetics. And this book logically follows the book on quantum computation, essentially because in the Emperor's quantum computer, or in my perception of quantum computation, it's a deeply creative process that is persistent, that happens at every instant. And as a result of that, there's a constant output. And this output of the quantum computation is, in fact, genetic type information. So, the origins and possibilities of genetics is a logical consequence of this persistent act of quantum computation that happens at a cosmic level and surfaces through the quantum veil into material existence. So, why do I essentially propose that light itself is the origin and the holds possibilities in genetics? Well, before I go into that in a little more detail, let me just read this one paragraph summary, which by the way, if you've looked at any of my other books, this is simply the most concise summary that I've ever written on perhaps this 300 page plus book. And let me read it verbatim, and then we can begin to deconstruct some parts of it today. So this book will explore the notion of content in light as the origin of genetics, the process of precipitation of light and the subsequent and mathematical creation of subtle DNA, replete with infinite four-based logic ecosystems as the origin of genetic structure and heredity, and quantum computation and its intimate relationship with the structure and evolution in matter as the origin of genetic mutation and all further genetic and post-genetic possibility. So that summarizes the breadth of that 300 plus page book. And here today, I'm going to just focus on a couple of aspects of this. So one, exploring the notion of content in light as the origin of genetics. So why do I propose that? So this goes back to the essential framework of a cosmology of light, in which we have multiple layers of light that all precipitate from the one native state of light where light supposedly travels at an infinite speed. And to me, that's the native state of light. And that native state, we can begin to get a sense for what reality might look like there by conducting a simple thought experiment. So if we have a large volume of light, and imagine the source of light to be the center and light's traveling infinitely fast, so it's going to be present in that whole volume instantaneously. And so therefore, light's going to create a reality of presence in that sphere. Second, if anything not of the nature of light arises, then it's going to be overcome by the nature of light sooner or later. So it's going to be subsumed by light. And therefore, there's a property of power that emerges. Third, since everything that arises or disappears does so in the fabric of light, it's being recorded. And so light has a knowledge of what's happening in its space instantaneously. And so there's this property of presence, of knowledge, rather. And then, since everything is connected in the nature of light, there is therefore a harmony since everything is coordinated in light itself. And so in this simple thought experiment, we have four properties that emerge, which I'll summarize as knowledge, power, presence, and harmony. But the way that I depict this in this book, The Origin and Possibilities of Genetics, is as four equations which try and describe how knowledge acts or what knowledge is in this space. Similarly, how presence acts, how harmony acts, and how power acts. And so these equations that have infinite number of solutions to them then become the basis of information that exists at this state where light travels infinitely fast. Now, what the corollary of this is that since we have infinite information, infinite solutions emanating from these four equations, therefore there's infinite possibility that exists in this native state where light travels infinitely fast. And that infinite possibility becomes the origin of everything else that can happen. And therefore the origin of any pre-genetic information or even genetic information or post-genetic information lies in these dynamics of essentially light existing at infinite speed. Now, subsequently, when we think about cosmology of light, there's several other layers of light that exist. But they all are precipitations of this native state of light. And one can think of these precipitations as acts of quantization, of subsequent quantization, different kinds of quantization that occurs. And so in the first quantization, when light travels, you can say slower than infinity, but way higher than our known speed of 186,000 miles per second in vacuum or C, then as I suggested also yesterday and I've written about elaborately, when you take the inverse of C, you can arrive at, in my perception, at Planck's constant or this constant that we call H that is instrumental in the creation of matter because it allows packets to accumulate information, and then at some threshold value, that information can express itself in material form. But if we have light traveling way faster than C, then the inverse of that is going to be a quote unquote H, which is way smaller than Planck's constant. And therefore, the kind of materialization that's going to occur, it will be of a different nature. So in that act of quantization where this first materialization occurs, where you have a kind of an H acting, which is way, 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 way smaller than H at this material realm, these four properties of knowledge, power, presence, and harmony differentiate into large sets of knowledge, presence, power, and harmony. So imagine everything that's contained in knowledge now materializing into a set of knowledge which has, practically speaking, infinite number of elements in it, all related to this thing that we call knowledge. So in practical terms, when we think about knowledge, we may think about knowledge of things as the eye sees it, knowledge of things as the mind can conceive it. So knowledge of things that are on the surface, knowledge of the things that are beyond the surface, going deeper into something, the knowledge of things that connects different entities together, the knowledge of things by which entities arise. I mean, so there's many different kinds of knowledge. And so these are all related to this property of knowledge. And similarly, you have vast sets with practically infinite elements for each of these four properties. So for presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. And at the second layer, then, these sets become the basis of information that exists at that layer of light. So now we have two sources of information that are materially different. We have these four equations that describe knowledge, presence, power, and harmony that have infinite solutions and describe one kind of information. And then you have knowledge, presence, power, and harmony becoming four vast sets that create a second source of infinite information as well. And then through a subsequent process of quantization, where light projects itself at a slower speed, so h is, or the equivalent of h is still way lower than h in the material realm, the kind of quantization that can occur is something that I perceive as a differentiation into many unique seeds. And these seeds we can mathematically think of as being different permutations and combinations of the elements of the four sets that have infinite elements in them. So essentially there's infinite number of seeds that can be created that are all unique. And this becomes the basis of information at this other layer of light due to the second act of quantization. Now, in a third act of quantization, we have these infinite number of seeds that then express themselves materially through the mechanics of space-time, energy, gravity. So in my perception, space-time, energy, gravity become the script by which the laws are written for each unique seed that's going to express itself materially. And this act of materialization in this physical universe, as I suggested yesterday, essentially precipitates the Big Bang. So the Big Bang is nothing other than infinity of information expressing itself materially. And so the cosmos, as it evolves, is a play of this possibility of this infinite information that's precipitated down to essentially the layer where light travels at sea. And when it's materializing, it uses the mechanics of space-time, energy, gravity, so that the script of a different kind of information or pre-genetic information is written using space-time, energy, gravity itself. But what really does that mean? What does it mean to write something using the script of space-time, energy, and gravity? So in my perspective, we can think about space as being that arena in which all these infinity of seeds, rather, these unique seeds, can express themselves materially. So they need an arena. And that arena we can think of as space. So space has inherently in it all these millions and millions and millions of seeds that constitute what space is. And time can be thought of as the maturation of these seeds into the fullness of what they represent. So time is not absolute, it's relative, just as space is relative, because space is going to be different depending on what set of seeds one is focused on or concerned with or living within. So space is going to be different in different parts of the cosmos in that sense, just as time is going to be different because time is going to evolve differently based on how the maturation of that subtle seed is going to become the fullness of what it represents. And then energy is that thing which actually takes the seed in its subtle form and makes it material. And we already know that energy is intimately related with mass through Einstein's E equal to mc squared. And then gravity itself is a relationship between seed and seed, or seeds and seeds. And so we know that even if we consider our own lives, generally speaking, there's certain unique set of individualities, or rather unique seeds, that are associated with any one life, and they exist in an ecosystem that again is precipitated due to the action of particular kinds of seeds. So gravity it captures that component. So when we look at any single seed, then there's going to be a specific logic of space-time energy gravity that's associated with it. And this logic is what constitutes pre-genetic information. And so the pre-genetic information is written in the script of space-time energy gravity and is recorded in an associated layer to do with that emergence itself. So at that point where light is precipitating into or coming down to speed c, one can conceive of this quantum veil or quantum layer, and I'll hypothesize that there's a medium there in which the logic of what's going to evolve initially is written out in this primitive space-time energy script. And then through a process of arbitration, and that's where quantum computation comes in, because quantum computation is always this arbitration of possibility between that which has emerged and that which stands behind it, the antecedent layers from which emergence takes place. And so there's a constant quantum computation by which possibilities materialize. And it's not inevitable, it's not determined. There's this active play that's going on based on what has materialized with what hasn't materialized that determines what's going to materialize next. And so that's what the quantum computation is. But the result of that is that there's, at the very least, the script, the space-time energy gravity script that's affected at this layer that exists at this quantum veil, if you will. Now, with each subsequent emergence, so when we think about the emergence of the electromagnetic fields, or of quantum particles, or of atoms, or of molecules, or of molecular plans, or of cells, there's a corresponding layer in which things are written. And of course, we're familiar, we've been able to penetrate the layer of living beings to actually understand the genetic structure, or at least that which has been written about all the different components that make up life in that species that we're focused on. But that's genetics. But it has its counterparts in pre-genetic information. And whether it's genetics or it's pre-genetics or it's post-genetics, something else that hasn't made itself evident yet, all these things arise from the same place. Their source is all in these multiple layers of light and the different kinds of information that exists at each layer. And therefore, I say that the origins and possibilities of genetics is in light itself. that's the main part that I want to focus on today. And one sentence, I'm going back to what's written here, and it says infinite four-based logic ecosystems. But I just explained what those four-based logic ecosystems are. They are space-time, energy, gravity, and in my perception, the logic of space-time, energy, gravity is even written into our genes. We don't perhaps associate it that way yet, but that's a prediction I'm making. Is that in fact, when we penetrate more deeply, we'll understand, or we'll see that there's a specific way in which something will arbitrate itself or will maneuver itself, that's associated with space-time, energy, gravity, and to me, that's the stuff that's been written into any layer, including the genetic layer. Um, there's many other things that one can discuss, but I just wanted to seed some thoughts for now and just introduce the idea of the origins and possibilities of genetics.